Codependency describes a pattern where a person's sense of safety, stability, or self-worth becomes excessively tied to another person's moods, needs, or approval. The term originated in addiction treatment, used to describe family members who organize their entire emotional lives around managing a loved one's substance use. But clinicians soon recognized the same underlying pattern in many relationships that had nothing to do with addiction. At its core, codependency involves difficulty identifying your own needs, an outsized sense of responsibility for other people's feelings, a strong fear of conflict or disapproval, and a tendency to measure your own worth by how needed or approved of you feel. It is not simply being a caring or generous person. The defining feature is the degree to which your own emotional equilibrium depends on someone else's. Their bad day becomes your bad day, and their approval can feel like the only thing keeping you steady. Codependency rarely appears out of nowhere. For most people, it begins as a sensible adaptation to an early environment that required it. Children raised in households with unpredictability, conflict, addiction, or emotional overwhelm often learn very young to read the emotional weather around them and adjust accordingly, becoming whatever the situation seemed to need in order to keep things calm. Family systems theory adds another layer. Families often assign unspoken roles to each member: the peacekeeper, the responsible one, the fixer. And a child who grew up playing one of these roles may have learned their value within the family depended on continuing to play it. These roles rarely get formally retired. They tend to follow people quietly into adulthood, replaying the same dynamics in new relationships, long after the original need for them has passed. Codependency often shows up through a small number of recognizable patterns. The rescuer pattern involves jumping in to fix other people's problems, sometimes before they've even asked for help, which can look like generosity, but often comes from discomfort with feeling helpless, or a belief that being useful is what makes you valuable. A related pattern involves a need for control, managing everyone's moods, smoothing over potential conflict before it happens, steering situations to avoid unpredictability. This can look like thoughtfulness, but it's frequently anxiety wearing a helpful costume, an attempt to control outcomes because unpredictability once felt genuinely unsafe. Both patterns share a common thread: taking on responsibility for things that were never actually yours to manage. Two further patterns round out the picture. People-pleasing is often the daily behavior codependency runs on: saying yes automatically, avoiding conflict, shaping yourself to whatever keeps things smooth, driven by the deeper belief that your safety depends on other people's approval. Emotional enmeshment, meanwhile, describes a merging of feelings. Someone else's anxiety instantly becomes your anxiety, their anger becomes your problem to solve, and your own emotional state stops existing separately from theirs. This differs from healthy empathy, which lets you feel with someone while staying anchored in your own perspective. Enmeshment often comes from family systems where individual feelings weren't really allowed, where everyone's mood had to match for the sake of safety. Shifting codependent patterns rarely works through sudden, complete change. It tends to work through repeated, small moments of noticing, catching the rescuer instinct and pausing to ask, "What do you actually need right now?" before jumping in. Catching the controlling impulse and tolerating a small amount of uncertainty instead of managing it away. Catching the automatic yes and creating a few seconds of space to check what you actually want before answering. Setting boundaries is often the hardest part of this work, especially for people used to over-giving. A boundary can feel at first like the meanest thing you've ever done. It isn't. A boundary is simply honest information about what you can actually offer, and most relationships grow healthier, not weaker, once boundaries arrive. The healthy alternative to codependency isn't total independence, needing no one, relying on nothing. That overcorrection misses the point. Needing people is a basic part of being human. The real alternative is interdependence. Two people, each reasonably whole on their own, who choose to rely on each other anyway, because connection is part of a good life rather than a threat to manage. Building this looks like communicating needs directly instead of hinting or over-functioning, letting people you love be imperfect without making it your job to fix them, and rebuilding a life and identity that exist independently of any one relationship. None of this happens overnight, and old patterns will resurface, especially under stress. That's normal, not failure. What matters is the direction, toward relationships where you can be fully yourself, fully needed, and fully able to need others in return. You don't need someone to complete you, you need someone willing to walk beside the whole person you already are.